Who doesn't love a good mystery? I've got one. So we ran the car last Saturday night and we made 2 runs. We got delayed with that battery ground issue. So we got behind with the night and it just wasn't really going as smoothly as you'd want it to. But to recap, we made a run and the car didn't feel right. It just wasn't snappy. Now, after I had changed the converter, I screwed around with it here in the shop in the parking lot, and it was hitting hard. It was hitting really hard. And so we went to the track Saturday night figuring it's just gonna carry over from that. But the first pass, like I said, it just wasn't really there. It didn't feel snappy like it did here. So we went back and we made a second run. Now, between the first and the second run, I checked a couple of plugs, and this is important. We're going to get to that in a second. I pulled a couple of plugs, random plugs, just to get a look at what the engine, what it was going on in there, right? So, here. So this is what the 2 plugs that I pulled out look like. I grabbed one from each bank, right? And I mean, that looks fine, okay? So I didn't think anything of it, and we sent the car for a second pass on. In the second pass, it was a little misfiring on the burnout, and then during the run itself, it missed several times going down the track. So at that point, I says, all right, well, we've already had like the hassle with the ground, the battery ground issue. We straightened that out, put us behind, and I was like, I'm not going to screw around with this thing anymore here. Let's just take back to the shop and see what's going on. So I pull all the plugs out of the one side. They all look good. I start pulling plugs out of the other side. First plug I pull out is number 2. Okay, so here's where the mystery happens. Number 2 cylinder. Okay, here's the plug. All right, now, if you notice, the gap on that plug has closed down. I measured it. It closed down to 6/1000ths of an inch. It's obviously, it's carbon fouled because it wasn't firing. Here's where the mystery happens. And here's where, go ahead, let's get the mechanical Sherlock Holmes in here and see if you guys can figure out what went on, because I'm still looking for the answer. This is the only plug that looked like this. The other 7 look just like the one I showed you. This is the only plug that looked like this. The ground strap closed up to where we've got a 6/1000ths of an inch gap. Now, here's the history on these plugs. I put these in the car fresh, new, I guess earlier this year, like the very beginning of the year. And then after I changed the converter, I went through everything else again, just looking stuff over, and I had the plugs out. The plugs all looked normal, and I checked them each individually. I looked at them each individually, and then pronounced them good to go and stuck them all back in. When I took them out of the package, they were pre-gapped at 35/1000ths. I checked the gap, they're at 35/1000ths. And down the road, I plan on screwing around with plug gap and side gapping them and all the other stuff. But for right now, I'm just trying to get a baseline on the car. So we know that this plug was new. We know that this plug came out of the box and it was good shape. We know that after it had been run a couple of times, the plug was still in good shape. So, and when I screwed around with the car here, it was hitting on all 8 and it was launching nicely. It was doing what I expected it to do. So this happened sometime during that first run Saturday night. But what caused that? Now here's where it starts to get interesting. Because typically when a plug gap closes up, it's a sign that something got in the combustion chamber. The most common thing is a broken ringland. So for whatever reason, a piston will break a ringland and the chunk will bounce around and it'll knock into the spark plug and close the gap up. But the interesting about this is that the ground strap is still completely square to the electrode. Usually what happens is when these things get closed up from an impact, there'll be a witness mark of some sort on the ground strap or wherever the plug got struck, and it'll be off a little bit. You know, like the ground strap will bend off a little bit, because what piece of debris bouncing around inside a combustion chamber is going to hit the ground strap dead on? So like that's the first thing. It's just closed up. Just closed up. All right. Say so, well, maybe something got in there. Maybe a piece of the ringland broke off and it just happened to hit it luckily like that. So I grabbed the camera and I went through each cylinder, right? For obviously first number 2, and the top of the piston looks fine. There's nothing missing out of it. There's no other marks inside the combustion chamber. Maybe a piece broke off inside one of the other cylinders, because that'll happen. You'll get debris. Sometimes when you get debris inside an engine, it'll bounce from cylinder to cylinder. So it could have been like a chunk from number 6 that found its way into the intake manifold and then bounced into another one. So I checked each of the cylinders, and looking at the tops of each of the pistons, all of the ringlands are still intact. And like I said, there's no marks inside the combustion chamber to show that any debris may have gotten in there. So at this point, I'm fairly certain, I'm very certain that nothing actually made contact with the plug, right? The ground strap is bent straight to the electrode. It's not like a regular impact where it's going to be off a little bit. There's no witness marks on it showing that, you know, it got hit and nudged or whatever. And it didn't close the gap up completely. It only closed it up to about 6/1000ths of an inch. I measured it with a feeler gauge. What could possibly cause this? If anything had gotten into the, let's say, dropped down one of the carburetors, there would be marks everywhere inside the combustion chambers from where it bounced around. And more than likely, it would be more than just one spark plug that caught the damage. What could cause a spark plug gap to close up 29/1000ths of an inch? They were pre-gapped to 35/1000ths. What could cause a spark plug gap to close up 29/1000ths of an inch without anything impacting it? This is interesting, right? Yeah, I did a quick Google search. I'm like, all right, what could hit, what could cause this? And nearly all of the responses were the same ones. Oh, piece of ringland broke off and got knocked around in there. And that's the common thing that happens. It happens fairly often. But without actually having a piece of debris broken inside the engine or finding its way inside the engine, what could cause a gap like that to close up? I saw an interesting on NGK's site where they were talking about detonation could cause this. And I'm not ruling out detonation, but generally speaking, there would be other signs of detonation on the plug. There would be marks. There would be marks on the ceramic. There would be discoloration like blue. Like if this thing had seen like real heat, the kind of heat that causes that kind of detonation, and let's say it would be hot enough to soften the ground strap, turn it like red hot, well, there would be signs of that, but there's nothing. It's just a dirty carbon fouled spark plug that looks exactly perfectly normal, except that the gap has closed up to 6/1000ths of an inch. All right, so put your detective hats on and see what you come up with, because I'm lost. We've covered all of the bases. And before you go any further, I know I checked the gap on them, each of them, and I know that I didn't drop it and then pick it up and then stick it in, because if I had dropped it, obviously I don't remember whether I dropped them or not, but if I had dropped it, obviously the first thing I would have done was looked at the ground strap to make sure that the gap didn't close up. And it wouldn't be the first spark plug I dropped, right? So I know that those weren't part of the equation. It was gapped perfectly going in. It didn't have any sort of upset while it was out of the engine. Saturday night, someplace between the burnout and the end of that run, the first one, that happened. And then it really showed itself on the second run. All right, what do you got? I'm going to watch the comments. Somebody give me a good answer for this, okay? I'll see you tomorrow.